What are the hardest working books to grow your business? A lot of businesses run on adrenaline, especially as you're starting up, as you're starting to get to that next place. Businesses always run into that bump where you get this big, and then in order to get the next level, what got you here isn't going to get you to the next spot. And so if you want a business that doesn't just run on adrenaline, I think you need some books that are sophisticated enough to give you a place to go, but not so ethereal and academic that you don't know how to use them. It can be a little difficult to find those books that are really going to help you grow. I want to give you guys things that'll work. All these books that I'm about to show you guys give practical, usable, concrete, and very encouraging. Because of that, when you read them, you're like, I can do this tomorrow. Like I can do this next week, right? And I think the honorable mention is one that you'll read as the next step. And I'll tell you what that is later. Okay, so today we're going to cover the hardest working books in business operations. They aren't shelf candy. They're going to do real work for you. The first one, number one, is Traction by Gino Wickman. So if you know me very much, you know that I'm a big advocate of EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. Well, this is kind of like if there's a doctrine, if there's a Bible, it's in this book. And so here's my copy. It's heavily highlighted. I have little tabs in there for different things. The point of Traction and why you call it Traction is because in fact, one of the first things you do is you organize your values, your tenure, and then you organize tasks. By the time you're done with that VTO, the Vision Traction Organizer, you have steps to take. So there are 6 main components is what this book claims, right? And I'm reading from my notes here. There are 6 key components in every business. And we strengthen these 6 components, everything else tends to become easier because these 6 components are highly pivotal and affect a lot of things that are downstream from them. The EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, gives you a repeatable framework to get clarity, accountability, and momentum. I've been using it for the last 7 years, and I've seen this happen. So the top tools in this book that they offer you, top tools, the Vision Traction Organizer, that organizes all the way from vision and values to what we can work on this quarter and problems that we need to solve this quarter, which is very much a today thing. The accountability chart. And so it's not an org chart. It's not like, here's the CEO, here's the COO, and he reports to him. It's what do these people have to get done in this role? Like, here's a spot. What's the function? What's the role? What do they do? What are they responsible to make sure of? And so it gets away from a lot of the technical, historical tradition of job roles, and it gets a lot more to the function. And then you have level 10 meetings, and these are weekly meetings. I mean, it's not fancy, right? It's weekly meetings, but it's highly structured. And I love L10 meetings, and I don't love all meetings. So what are some complaints that come against this book? What are some objections to this kind of doing it this way? Well, one of them is EOS is too rigid for creative companies. And so the way it goes is we're a creative company and we have to be able to solve problems on the fly. Every single client needs something different. We're a creative company. Creatives don't like rigid stuff. It messes with their style. They want to be able to be free to do whatever they want, to change plans today, to go do something else. And a lot of those things you can still do with EOS. EOS is a perfect fit for creative companies because you have these leverage points. You have a weekly meeting, you have quarterly planning, and then you have jobs people do throughout the week. It's not like you have all these meetings during the week for EOS. You have a meeting that keeps you working on your business. And that's that L10 meeting. Yes, you're working on things in your business, but you're also working on your business and you're being very thoughtful. And it's an hour and a half. That's all. What you can get done in that time, done in that time. But you are focusing on the bigger issues that you can work on together. And issues tend to resolve when you focus on the problem and not focus on, you define the problem really well. More on that later. That's part of the creative process and the creative background. So another objection is we already have meetings, and it goes like, hey, we don't need more meetings. We don't need more meetings that are just going to do the same thing. But the difference about the EOS meetings, and if you combine this with manager tools, you end up having very productive meetings because the L10 meeting has a structure, but it's a structure that asks interesting questions. It keeps stakeholder headlines, partner headlines. What's going on? Do we have a client who is having a baby, or one of our employees is going to take a long vacation? And we just need to make sure, is it an issue or is it already taken care of? But it's all these things, and it keeps everything in front of you. And so that nothing is left and you're not losing sleep at night because something you forgot to do that's going to hurt your business. And then most of the meeting is just identifying issues and solving them, defining them and solving them. And so that makes a pretty productive meeting. Our team doesn't like metrics. So We don't want to be measured by, or we're a creative company and you can't quantitatively measure something as qualitative as creative work. But I mean, that's kind of not true, right? Like you still need to know what your clients think about you. You still need to know, are we cash flowing and are we growing in our cash flow? Or are we receding in our cash flow? Or are we profitable? Things like that. Those are all measurables. How many people, how many customers are we talking to every week? Is our sales team doing the things that they need to do? This isn't about doing it someone else's way. This is about doing it your way, but then measuring toward that. It's not like you never talk to customers or never prospect because you're a creative company. You prospect your way. You do it your way. Maybe you set up an online conversation. You set up a webinar or something like that, and you're doing it your way. And so metrics always go with those things. It may not be how many people signed up. Maybe how many people have we talked to? How many people we get out there and just talk to and just have a conversation with? You're not a hard seller probably, but you're helping people solve problems and you are talking with them about that. And you're hoping that if it's a fit, then they become one of your clients. And so our team doesn't like metrics. I mean, you don't need 100 KPIs. You may need a handful, 6, and then you grow from there and you say, okay, why isn't this number moving? And then you ask questions and then you say, oh, it's because a contributing number is not moving. This is the real leverage point, and you learn by measuring. And so, our team doesn't like metrics. I'm not buying it. Well, they may not like metrics, but sometimes it's because they don't like accountability. Okay. So Scaling Up by Verne Harnish. So in Traction, they refer to, this isn't a competing book. This is a kind of a companion book for EOS. And it goes a little deeper into some of the how, right? And so where Traction is like, here's how to think about it, top down, simple, let's get some metrics in place and get you moving. Scaling Up is, all right, well, how do we get a little more sophisticated about those things? What they talk about is, well, that their top tools are a strategic plan, right? But that strategic plan is echoed in, if you're already doing EOS, your VTO is your strategic plan. And so it's already taken care of there. There's the Rockefeller habits checklist that they have. What I want to say about a lot of these things is that you take what these systems give you, and then you don't use what you don't want to use. And so if you're like Rockefeller habits, that sounds old, or that sounds really corporate and big old money, and we're not really that way. We're a little more creative. That's fine. You take what works for you, and then you don't have to use all of it. Scaling Up is probably the second book I would say read after Traction. The second thing to implement is Principles from Scaling Up, but get a copy, go through it, highlight the stuff you want to use that's you're most excited about, and then save the rest for later. And then Functional Accountability Chart, that's the third tool. That's kind of like their theory. I'm pretty sure that the EOS guys took some inspiration from Scaling Up and they've kind of simplified it a little bit. And then Scaling Up is like, okay, but here's, if you want to know more, if you want to go deeper and you want to understand things a little better. So common objections. Scaling Up is for small teams, it's too much. It's too much for small teams. But the thing is that about Scaling Up is you can fit the tools to your stage. You can simplify and you can take a subset of those tools and you can use them in your startup, in your small business, in your technology company, or right now, and then build them out later. In fact, there's a process girl whose channel I follow, she's a lady. She clearly has experience. Layla Pomper, I think is her name. And she goes through process. I love her channel. And it's a little bit like Work the System, which we'll talk about in a minute. But she talks about processes and she's like, you don't have to make all the processes at once. You take care of the things that are on fire. You take care of the pain points. Then you make processes for those things. And so they're done the same way every time. And nobody has to spend a bunch of time and thinking, trying to engineer a process each time that they do that thing. If there's a monthly process bothering you or that's not getting done right, then make that monthly process. You don't have to engineer the whole company at once. So don't be overwhelmed by these things, including the complexity. Okay, we don't have time for strategy. Okay, so this is one of the biggest. So there was one time when I was helping out an engineering lab at the University of Iowa. The engineers described it as ready, fire, aim. It was as if they instinctually knew, because they were feeling the pain of a lab that was fast moving, very smart people, very hard workers. But they would get a project and they would just start working and they wouldn't talk about it and they wouldn't plan it. And there were a lot of problems that the lab didn't have the mentality to slow down and solve, because they were fast moving, hardworking, burning midnight oil, just working long hours. And when the order came, we sat down around a table and we just said, okay, let's stop for a second. Let's talk about where we're going. Let's talk about what we're trying to get done with all these projects. And it's a soft money lab. So it's not like a business. It's a soft money university lab that depended on winning new projects, STTRs and SBIRs, if you know what those are, and military government contracts. or private companies like Rockwell Collins and places like that. And then winning these bids and then trying to make sense of how do we work. And so it wasn't like, oh, our goal is to make this much revenue. No, it's a soft money lab. We don't do that. What we could do was solve problems. And one of the things we did was we stopped, slowed down, and we got around a table. And I got everybody away from their desks. So we got around a table. We're like, what are the problems? And it would be a problem that wasn't in plain English. And even if I did understand it, I'd be like, say that again in plain English. Or I would say, so this is what's going on. And they'd be like, yeah, sort of. And then they would add more detail until I understood the problem really, really simply. And so did everybody around the room. And by the time everybody understood the problem really simply, someone had a solution because everybody now realized what problem there was. Or they're like, oh, you didn't know we could do this. And I didn't know you needed this, but now I understand that. And so I can just give this to you, you know? It's as easy as sending an email. Now the problem's solved. And that's seriously, we knocked down like 15 big problems in the first couple months. And everybody knew it. Everybody knew there was change, right? Everybody knew that things were way easier to do, way less work to get done because we stopped and we talked about the problem. And so the same thing is we don't have time for strategy. And so, the issue is bad execution wastes so much more money than you would spend on strategy, especially at the company level. Like maybe at the local level, I have a creative director friend who he'll just put everything on his back and drag it across the finish line and he'll do the work. Okay, sure. You can do that temporarily. But when it comes to higher things, like at some point, his health is going to suffer and he's going to wish he would have thought of these things beforehand. And so it's worth talking these things through and figure out what happens when we scale. What happens if we got another client? What would happen? What would you do? Your wife would hate you. You'd never see your kids. Bad execution wastes more time than planning ever will. Okay, the final objection to scaling up is this feels very corporate. This is more about discipline and about doing things that make sense to you. If whatever in this book or any other book doesn't make sense to you, don't use it. This is really more about like, hey, obviously to grow your company, you have to do this, this, and this, right? And you're like, yeah, we have to do all those things. Okay, cool. Here's a way to make sure you're keeping it in front of you and not letting it fall by the wayside. And now I'm remembering other books that I should mention, like the E-Myth. The E-Myth is like, make a company that can run without you. Here's how you push work down. Here's how you make sense of your company. The E-Myth is great for that. Let's move to number 3, Work the System by Sam Carpenter. A lot of these, they're based on overworked founders, overworked executives, overworked people at the top. And so Work the System, basically it's stop living in the whirlwind, right? Stop living in the chaos. And he really points to the chaos is coming from you. And that's a hard truth sometimes to hear, but the chaos is coming from the one who will not pass down the work, who will not push down the work, who will not organize the company, who will not make sense of it. Like, what are some examples of that? I always think of that one example where, oh, we're a conscious company, people, planet, profits, we're triple bottom line. And it sounds really nice and it sounds really friendly. And it sounds like, oh, wow, what a company with a heart. But what it's really doing is it's confusing everyone because now we're saying these things, people, planet, profits, but customers are like, okay, do you care about us though too? Okay, yeah, we're part of the people, but what's going to happen when there's you're like, I know you're about profits, right? And I know that part of having profits is that you want to keep me as a customer. So all that makes sense. But when you turn it into like people and planet and profits, now your employees are like, I don't know what we stand for right now. Is today a people, profit, or planet day? Because usually you have to decide what you're going to sacrifice. It's kind of like the iron triangle of project management. You have to decide what you want. Do you want speed and low cost? Well, then you need a lot lower quality. Do you want high quality and speed? Well, you're going to have to pay a lot more for it. And so you choose these things and you decide which ones are important. With people, planet, profits, it's kind of like, well, we choose which one. Choose like you're going to pay for all of them. Who's going to pay for that? Is it going to be your clients? Who's going to pay for all that stuff? And so you have a lot of really confusing priorities there. But if you're like, hey, maybe some of your values are like, hey, we care about the environment. But the thing is, what you mean by that is you're going to do things within serving people, serving your clients, in other words, making a profit by serving your clients. And then somewhere in there is like, yeah, but if we have to choose what to, we have a layer of environmental concern or whatever in there, somewhere, and it can make sense that way. But if it's at the top along with profits, then you're like, well, which one? And so it's disorganized. And so what tools do we have for Work the System? Sam Carpenter ran a business in Bend, Oregon. He was working all the time and starting to not be able to pay the bills. And he tells a story about him waking up and realizing, hey, I just have a lot of things that can be organized that are just not organized. I'm doing them different every time. And so, the only way to buy back your time, basically you have to document your systems and stick to them. And that is the only way to get to buy back your time and build something that lasts, something sustainable. Top tools in this system, in his book, Work the System. Top tools are your strategic objective, which you'll also find in EOS, and you'll find a version of that in Scaling Up as well. And so you're going to find general operating principles. And this is really more like, so where the rubber meets the road, processes. And this is the process book, kind of like Layla Pomper, kind of like that, what we were talking about before. And then we have working procedures. And so the general operating principles and then working procedures that work together. So your general operating principles are, here's how we think about operations. Then you document it. And then working procedures is the things we do. Now, over operationalize, yeah, that's kind of like the principle, do what's on fire, deal with what's on fire. Common objections to Work the System. We don't have time to document everything. The argument is like, well, if we document everything, like things are changing too fast. And I'll tell you, I've tried to document things that were changing. And I'm like, you know what? If I document this, no one in a year when we use this again, no one is going to remember. Things are going to change too much by then. Or like, here's a process for quoting website projects. But then the next website project we run into is totally different, custom, and it's on a different platform or something. And there's always something changing. And so there are still things you can document about that. There's still a process you can document, but what you don't want to do is document it, spend a bunch of time documenting everything based on the last project, and then find out that you've wasted hours. You wasted 70% of your time in documentation because you over documented. My take is you document the things that are on fire and you document to solve particular problems. And so you're not over documenting, you're just documenting to solve those problems. And then you don't over document because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. You don't have to guess too much. You just document simply, start from the top, build down, and then as you go, you might see things you can build further down. Our business is too custom for systems. In the creative industry and in engineering, you're doing things often for the first time. You're building processes from scratch, or every client is new and every client has a new need, or you're an innovative company and you're solving a problem that's brand new. And so you need to focus on principles, not focused on like, here's what we did before. It's like, no, you have to understand the principles really well. And if you don't understand the principles, you're not going to create anything new. A lot of people call that resourcefulness or whatever, but that's creativity and happens in the long-term memory. And so that's why companies that base themselves on principles have a really easy time solving and finding problems. But then they can sometimes have a difficult time turning those principles into operations, turning those principles into here's how we do things always, because they're so good at conceptual thinking that now creating a company that works and a company that works the same every time, they kind of don't want to do that. But there are processes you can follow so that your company doesn't run like a black box, because maybe you want to sell that company, maybe you want investors, and you need to be able to show a company that makes sense and has processes. You're going to get more traction that way when it comes to the actual sale of the business when the operations are solid. That's what this is about. Systems aren't the enemy of that conceptual thinking. They're not the enemy of customization. They actually undergird it and they make everything else easier so you can focus on that critical thinking and that conceptual problem solving. It feels robotic, right? It feels robotic following all these rules. But the fact is that if you can get out of the day-to-day because other people are handling all that stuff that is like the back office administrative process stuff, the fact is that if you're super busy right now and you get together with an operations person or you read one of these books and you realize, hey, there's some things from in my job description. If I sat down and wrote my job description, all the functions that I do, I might realize there's a way to hand these off if only I had the time. But that's a start because you can hand them off. So now I have to find ways to build that training. And sometimes it's not like, well, now I have to sit down and create a formal training manual. There are ways to incrementally do these things. But the first thing is you have to prioritize. And if you can't prioritize and find your problems, you're gonna own all that work and you're gonna be burned out, and you don't need to do that. And so you can actually be creative and strategic once you get out of reactive mode. And that's what these are for. It's to get you out of reactive mode and into problem solving mode. Now, the last one, and probably my favorite because I was involved in its creation, is this book called You Are Remarkable by Mike Jones, David Kosand, and Dr. Jeff Watson. And so these guys understand branding super duper well. And this is where I was the chief operations officer and integrator for 7 years at this branding agency. And so that's like, how do I know these things work? These books work? It's because I've done it. But the cool thing is part of this is values. If you look at EOS, if you look at the VTO, you're looking at values. And why are values so important for a hardworking, rubber meets the road kind of book that I'm talking about here. If you think like morale or culture is not important. Now, there are some stupid things about culture. The way they talk about culture today, there's some stupid things in how they talk about culture today on LinkedIn or whatever. But when you're talking about culture, you're really talking about esprit de corps, you're talking about morale. And these are all things that when I was a kid, we heard this in the military all day long. Esprit de corps, morale. You want to keep up morale because, in fact, Sun Tzu talks about it in The Art of War. If you think this is fluffy, touchy-feely stuff, yeah, there's some stupid stuff. But that doesn't mean that the whole topic has no merit. Napoleon, any military general, if you want to talk about like life or death, right? You're talking about war. Sun Tzu talked about, he talked about morale all the time. He talked about it. If you push your enemy into a place where they can't escape, then they're going to fight harder. And he's like, that's a human factor, right? You give them a way of escape so they can flee. And so they're not fighting for their lives. He also talked about don't take a walled city. Like don't put a city or castle under siege because it'll take a long time. It'll use your resources and your troops' ardor, esprit de corps, their morale. We're talking about who are we, no matter if anybody likes it or not. And then how do we hire for that? And then how do we go out and find people who resonate with those values? So if I have values like, hey, I'm here for like human flourishing. And what that means is I want people to be stronger after they work with me. And I think that's definitely a value I have. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do with that though? Are you going to work for a casino? I don't know. You may decide, oh, that's entertainment and people need entertainment. It makes them better. Okay, cool. I don't feel that way. I think it can cause destruction. And I don't really know how much good versus bad comes out of it. So if my view is that people get addicted when they gamble, well, then I don't want to work. That doesn't fit my values. And I'm not going to hire people who want my clients to not flourish, right? You're going to hire based on that. It determines and encodes your culture. And so your brand kind of confirms your culture, makes it explicit. And what happens when people out there and people, who would be clients, they see your values and they see them being really consistent and they see that your values are going to cost you sometimes. Now they're like, oh, they're really putting it on the line. They really believe in this stuff. I believe them. What people don't believe are these fake values. Like one time I was in a brand workshop and the CEO was like, well, among our values, well, we also have to have, diversity. We got to throw diversity in there. And I'm like, wait, like, what do you mean by diversity? And how does that help your customers and serve your mission? And what are some examples of diversity that you do in your company? And so to his credit, he was like, okay, you know what? You're right. Let's forget about that. And that's what this book is all about. Your brand isn't your logo. It's your internal clarity about who you are. So there are some companies that will brand you based on who you want to appeal to. But authentic brands are like, no, here's what our values are. Here's what we stand for. And here's right and wrong. And here's the kind of values we're going to have, how we're going to act so that we can sleep at night and so that we can feel good about who we are. And that's different. It comes from the inside out. It's like what's true about the world and about us. And then how do we live that out? You're not using people. You're living out the values that you hold yourself. Top concept. Brand is a cultural foundation. So it tells you how to think about brand as a cultural foundation for your company, for your culture, so that your brand, you can actually hire based on your brand. Whereas before you're like, oh, we just like this guy. Now it's like, we like him. And then here are all our values that he shares. And then here's a deal breaker. Authentic messaging as strategy. So authentic messaging becomes a cornerstone of your strategy, not just your culture, but your strategy as well. And then identity before execution. So you don't execute your way to identity. You don't create things on your way to identity. You create your identity first, focus on expressing that, and then you go and live it out. Common objections. Branding is just marketing fluff. And so a lot of people think that. They're just like, hey, it's all about selling. I talked with one guy, he's like, it's all about sending sales letters. And that moves the needle and brand doesn't. You want alignment. You want honesty. And if you haven't talked about what your values are, nobody in your company, they can just do whatever they want. The leader of the company, the founder, can do whatever they want, and they can just change their values all the time and leave everyone confused. And it creates toxicity. It creates a toxic working environment. When you're lying about who you are, when you're acting one way and saying another thing, it's toxic. We've all been in those places where you're like, they say they stand for this. And so you go out and you try to do that, and then you get in trouble for it. Another one is we don't need branding, we need sales. But branding removes friction and confusion, and it makes sales easier because people know they can trust you. You're organized, you say what you are, they see that you're doing what you say you are, and now everything is easier. Another one is, we'll define our brand later. We don't need to do that right now. And okay, if you're just starting out, I would say that may be a little true. If you're like a one person or just a couple of people getting together, trying something out, And I've been in these brand workshops. I've helped run these brand workshops for the last 7 years. And so I know that it's possible that you can do that. And for sure, hey, the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago, the second best time today. But if you wait too long, you may end up building a culture by accident that's not purposeful and doesn't match your values. It more matches the opportunities that are out in the market. How do you use these books? Let's wrap it up. Each book, I think, serves a different role. And I think I would start with Traction because it gives you that basic structure. And that's really what I do as an EOS integrator. I was going to say I implement Traction, but really there's another role called implementer that is very experienced in implementing. And not all small companies want to hire an implementer right away. An integrator is an interim implementer, I suppose. Even if you don't hire an integrator, you can read Traction and get familiar with the ideas, and you can do what's called self-implementation. It doesn't happen as fast, but it can happen, and you can use these principles. Traction gives you that structure. Scaling up helps you grow within that structure. And so it gives you sophistication where you can start growing in the skill it takes to execute on that Traction structure. The two books work really well together. And then Work the System gets you out of firefighting, but so does Traction. So why would you use Work the System? Because Work the System talks about how to make these things, all these principles you learn in scaling up. And in Traction, it teaches you how to build those things down into further processes. And then You Are Remarkable, it reminds you to build from your identity and from the truth of who you are and your real mission, instead of going out there and just trying to do stuff. And it gives your culture that cornerstone. And so where Scaling Up and Work the System start building out a lot of those other pieces of your company, of your VTO, You Are Remarkable helps you understand why the values matter and how to expand those outward and how to become more sophisticated in how you understand yourself. These are books that I think help creative organizations. And they're also books that I think help honest founders who want to do things the right way, want to treat people right, want to live out their values and still grow and make a structure and a long-lasting company that they'll be proud of.